A man suddenly opens fire during rush hour, catching everyone off guard. At the same time, a radical group is plotting to overthrow the government. Elsewhere, a law enforcement officer mistakenly shoots an innocent woman. A heavily armed bank robber keeps pulling off one daring heist after another. Then, in a horrifying act, a man kidnaps and kills a 17-year-old girl. To keep the public safe, the FBI must act quickly and decisively to catch these dangerous criminals before they strike again. I'm Tim Carlster, former head of the FBI's New York office. In this special feature, we're taking a closer look, this time focusing more on the investigative techniques that have shaped the FBI into the world's most trusted and effective law enforcement agency. As FBI Director Robert S. explains, the Bureau wasn't always what it is today. Originally, it was established to handle criminal cases that cross state lines, crimes that local police departments simply weren't equipped to handle. But as the nation grew larger and the world became more interconnected, the FBI had to evolve rapidly to stay ahead of ever-changing threats. In October 1995, the Sean family experienced what can only be described as a nightmare. 3 masked men, all armed, forced their way into their home in South Carolina. While 2 of them held the family hostage, the leader pressured Amy, who worked at a bank, to take him to the vault. They walked out with $8,000 in cash, and although Amy was unharmed, the trauma lingered. Just before fleeing, the gang leader called his partners to say the job was done and they needed to disappear. As soon as the intruders left, the Sean family contacted the police. Soon after, 2 young men were found in the neighborhood and brought in for questioning. However, without fingerprints or physical evidence tying them to the crime, there was no clear connection. During interviews with the local police, the 2 suspects denied any involvement. Still, investigators weren't convinced. The FBI stepped in, knowing that a confession was crucial. But extracting one would require precise interview tactics, the kind that only come from intense training and real-life experience. As Special Agent Jerry Jones explained, their training gives them the tools, but it's field work that really teaches agents how to read people. Over time, they learn how to ask the right questions, interpret subtle clues, and understand what makes a person crack. When Jones sat down to question one of the suspects, he started with neutral topics, nothing directly related to the case. That gave him the chance to figure out the suspect personality and choose the best approach. While speaking with him, Jones picked up on a major vulnerability. The man had a deep fear of the death penalty. What the suspect didn't know was that Amy had survived. Jones saw an opening and used it. He calmly told the man that the safety of the bank employee was his top priority. Then he said, "If your friend hurt her, if something happened to her, you're looking at the electric chair." The gravity of that possibility shook the suspect. Now, this kind of psychological strategy has to be used with care. It can just as easily backfire if the suspect shuts down completely. But in this case, the plan worked. Faced with his worst fear, the man confessed the crime and even gave up the name of the ringleader, Christopher D. Shortly after, D was located at his mother's house just over the state line in Georgia. He was arrested and later convicted on all charges. But that wasn't the end of the story. Before his sentencing, D managed to escape from jail, teaming up with another inmate, a known bank robber named Jerome Ferson Bay. As soon as news of the jailbreak hit, law enforcement sprang into action. The area was locked down and a massive manhunt began. But despite the intense search, there were no immediate leads on where Christopher D. and Jerome Ferson Bay had gone. Special Agent Jerry Jones knew just how critical the early hours of a prison break could be. Escapees sometimes leave behind small but telling signs, clues about where they might be headed or who they might reach out to. Jones recalled one key insight from previous interrogations. D had a deeply emotional attachment to his mother. That was a rare weak spot, and Jones suspected he might eventually try to contact or visit her. So they placed D's mother under full surveillance, hoping he'd show up. But days passed with no sign of him. Meanwhile, the escapees continued their crime spree, robbing more banks as they made their way up the East Coast. Eventually, the trail led authorities to New Jersey, where they caught up with Jerome Ferson Bay. During questioning, it became clear he had split from D who was now on his own. Investigators were frustrated but determined. The next break came in Atlanta, where they discovered that D was using a fake identity and working under the radar. He was taken into custody without further incident, returned to prison, and this time sentenced to life behind bars. Looking back, Agent Jones reflected on what made the difference in this case: instinct and experience. By focusing on D's emotional connection to his mother and interpreting subtle behavioral cues, they had been able to predict his movements and eventually bring him down. But not every case can be cracked by a single agent. Sometimes, solving complex crimes takes a combined force of many different departments, working side by side. That was the situation in Seattle back in 1992. A man, armed and reckless, launched into a series of audacious bank robberies. He was willing to shoot anyone who got in his way. People started calling him Hollywood because he wore elaborate disguises during his heists, almost like he was performing in some twisted action movie. Over the years, Hollywood stole nearly $1 million. He left behind almost no clues, making him nearly impossible to catch. Realizing the scale of the threat, the Seattle police teamed up with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to form a joint task force. The idea was simple: pool together their unique skills and resources to target this one major threat. It was a rare collaboration, but a necessary one. Different agencies had different methods, and not everyone agreed on how things should be done. But with time, patience, and a shared goal, the task force began operating like a single, unified team. Leading the task force was FBI Special Agent Alan Glasser. She recalled how bringing multiple agencies together was no easy task. Each group had its own mission, its own mindset. That created some tension in the beginning. But over time, something important happened. Mutual respect grew, and everyone began working toward the same goal. Detective Mike Megan of the Seattle Police Department also worked with the task force. He described it like being a guest in someone else's house, the FBI's house. While there was a high level of professionalism, egos had to be set aside. Sometimes you weren't the one calling the shots, and that was okay, as long as the job got done. The team put a lot of effort into communication and trust building. In fact, that became their secret weapon. With a strong team dynamic, things ran more smoothly and everyone knew their role. Agent Glasser focused on team cohesion, and it paid off. Together, they analyzed patterns from Hollywood's previous robberies, hoping to anticipate his next move. And finally, on November 27, 1996, their planning paid off. Hollywood was identified as the prime suspect in another armed bank robbery. The task force tracked him to a trailer where he was hiding out. As agents closed in, they ordered him to surrender. Tragically, instead of giving himself up, he turned a gun on himself and ended his life. Though his arrest never happened, the operation proved just how powerful interagency collaboration could be. Everyone brought their own expertise to the table, but in the end, they operated as one unit, efficient, focused, and determined. While field agents often receive praise for capturing criminals, there's another group behind the scenes that plays a vital role: the forensic scientists at the FBI's crime lab in Quantico. These professionals aren't just lab techs in white coats. They're problem solvers, detectives in their own right, and their work often determines whether a case gets solved or not. Dr. Dwight Adams, deputy director of the lab, shared what drew him to this line of work. He described it as a place where every employee is driven by purpose and a passion for uncovering the truth. Their commitment is clear. They aim to deliver results that are not just accurate, but undeniable in court. One case from January 11th, 1982, shows just how critical the lab's work can be. A patrol officer discovered the body of Robin Bishop, a young woman with a gunshot wound to the head, lying beside the interstate in California. At first, it looked like a suicide, but something didn't sit right. For starters, there was no gun at the scene. More telling, there were marks on her wrists that looked like she'd been tied up, and the angle of the wound didn't match a self-inflicted shot. It was clear Robin had been murdered. When police examined the scene more closely, they noticed Robin's driver's license and registration were neatly laid out, almost as if someone had placed them there intentionally. That raised even more red flags. Investigators began looking into every officer in the area, just in case the killer was one of their own. They ordered every local officer to turn in their service weapon for ballistic testing. Only one refused, Officer George Galtney. He claimed his gun had been stolen, which instantly made him a person of interest. Digging deeper, investigators found something suspicious in Galtney's truck: the handle of a disassembled revolver. The barrel, the part that could be matched to the fatal bullet, was missing. They also found ammunition in his bedroom, and it matched the type used in Robin's killing. By the end of 1982, California charged Galtney with murder, but things didn't go as planned. The jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, and the case ended in a mistrial. A second trial also failed to bring a conviction. At this point, state prosecutors had hit a dead end, so they turned to the FBI for help. Special Agent Michael Randolph took a fresh look at the evidence and quickly saw the challenge. Without the gun's barrel, they couldn't link the bullet to the weapon in the usual way. But maybe, just maybe, they could find another path to justice. That's where Jim Cadogan came in, a firearms and tool mark expert at the FBI lab. Cadogan started searching for alternative ways to tie Galtney to the crime. He knew that when the grip of the revolver was recovered, it came with a bunch of tools, pliers, wrenches, and other equipment. Cadogan had a theory. What if one of those tools had been used to hold the weapon in place while it was being dismantled? He focused on a small indentation on the grip and examined every tool found with it. Eventually, he found a match, a pair of pliers with a chipped tooth. Under the microscope, the imprint left on the gun handle lined up perfectly with the broken part of pliers. That might not have been enough for a murder conviction, but it clearly showed Galtney had tampered with the gun. The lab team then decided to take a bold step. They turned to a cutting-edge technology that had never been used in court before: nuclear activation analysis. Nuclear activation analysis was a revolutionary technique at the time. The idea was to examine the chemical makeup of the bullet that killed Robin Bishop and compare the bullets found in Galtney's possession, right down to the molecular level. Special Agent Michael Rand explained it like this: when ammunition manufacturers like Remington Arms produce lead, the exact ingredients vary slightly, kind of like making a meatloaf with your own twist. That means every batch of lead has a unique chemical fingerprint. FBI scientists took a fragment of the bullet retrieved from Robin's skull and placed it in a nuclear reactor, where it absorbed neutrons and emitted radiation. That radiation revealed the exact makeup of the lead. They repeated the same process with the bullets found in Galtney's home, and the results were undeniable. The samples matched. Armed with this breakthrough evidence, prosecutors brought the case back to federal court. In January 1984, George Galtney stood trial once again. This time, thanks to the relentless work of the FBI's forensic lab and their willingness to push scientific boundaries, he was found guilty and sentenced to 90 years in prison. He died of a heart attack 12 years later while serving his sentence. Executive Assistant Director Grant Ashley reflected on the unsung heroes in cases like these, the scientists working behind the scenes, away from the spotlight. They're the ones who break down the mystery, he said. It takes extraordinary patience and talent to get those irrefutable results. Scientific proof is powerful. But what happens when investigators have no suspect, no strong leads, and barely any evidence to work with? In those cases, the FBI turns to one of its most complex and intriguing tools: criminal profiling. Take what happened on May 31st, 1985. A 17-year-old girl named Sherry Smith vanished without a trace after walking to her mailbox in Lexington, South Carolina. 2 days later, her family received a terrifying phone call. She had been kidnapped. The kidnapper promised they'd get a letter soon. When it arrived, it was written in Sherry's handwriting, entitled Last Will and Testament. The implications were chilling. The local police were stumped, so they reached out to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico. That's where Special Agent John Douglas came in, a pioneer in profiling and one of the Bureau's most respected minds. Douglas and his team had spent years interviewing serial killers, arsonists, rapists, and other violent criminals. They used what they learned to build detailed behavioral profiles, a sort of psychological sketch of the type of person most likely to commit a given crime. In Sherry's case, Douglas began digging through every detail: the crime scene, the victim's background, and the way the letter was written. It quickly became clear that this wasn't a random act. The kidnapper had spoken directly to family, something rare and incredibly risky. But for Douglas, that was promising. Words, whether written or spoken, offer insight, and this man had left behind more than he realized. Douglas began to piece together a profile. The suspect was likely male, local to the area, and someone who craved control. He probably suffered from low self-esteem and may have been physically unattractive or socially isolated. Targeting someone like Sherry gave him a sense of power he couldn't achieve in his everyday life. Soon after, another tragedy struck. The same suspect abducted a 9-year-old girl named Deborah Mayhelm. The stakes skyrocketed. Douglas, believing the suspect was under mounting pressure, crafted a media strategy designed to lure him out. And it worked. The killer contacted the family again, giving them directions to Deborah May's body. Using forensic techniques, investigators lifted hidden impressions from the letter Sherry had written and linked it to a local man named Larry Gene Bell. Everything matched his appearance, his background, his behavior. Bell was arrested, tried, and eventually executed for murders. Thanks to profiling, forensic innovation, and unwavering teamwork, justice was served, not just in this case, but in countless others. Whether it's tracking fugitives, infiltrating extremist groups, or analyzing bullets on a molecular level, the FBI brings together science, instinct, and strategy to take down threats and protect the public. And they're not slowing down anytime soon.